Thank you so much, Gunther, and hi everybody, nice to see you all here today. So I have to say, to tell you again, I'm Deandra Rose. I'm the Director of Research for Panelists, Duke's, and Stanford's Politics Center. And I have a privilege, the unique privilege of inviting you to Stanford tonight and to be a part of tonight's discussion about women in politics, the difference that women make in politics, and the significance of having women at the table. So we're really delighted to have all of you here tonight, and particularly this panel of women who are pushing important boundaries. So to start off with a little bit of context for tonight's discussion, many of you might know this, but some of you might be surprised to learn that according to the Interparliamentary Union, the United States ranks 78th out of 190 countries when it comes to the proportion of women who are serving in elected office in the lower level or the lower chamber of the parliament or the legislative body, nationally speaking. So the U.S. trails behind a number of countries, including Rwanda, Mexico, Germany, China, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Research on the resilient gender gap in American politics point to a number of reasons why this is the case in the United States. So political parties are less likely to actually recruit women to run for office. So you might be surprised to learn that. You might not. But if women actually make it into the electoral arena, typically they deal with different experiences on the campaign trail. So you might notice that, and we're seeing some of this in the national discourse on women in politics, women are more likely to face questions about how serving in office will line up with their family responsibilities. So they might get asked, who's taking care of your kids? Or, people might question whether or not women are tough enough to serve in elected office. People might also raise questions about women's quote-unquote likability and, the question about their capacity to even be engaging candidates. So I think that's especially interesting. Women are also more likely to question their own capacity to lead. So even before jumping into the ring as a candidate, women are oftentimes more likely to hesitate than their male counterparts. So they're more likely to question whether or not they can do the job. And reportedly, women have to be asked 7 times to run for office before they'll actually do so. So that's an interesting fact to think about. So beyond the challenges that women face in making it to the campaign trail, research also suggests that women make a really important difference when it comes to serving in office, because oftentimes women's policy preferences diverge from those of their male counterparts. And this is especially the case for social policies and things like whether or not to provide social provisions through programs like TANF or other social supports, as well as programs related to children and families, as well as the capacity or the interest in going to war. Women and men tend to diverge there. So really important reasons why we ought to care about the question of whether or not women can be elected to office or whether or not women should serve there. So when women represent more than half of a population in the world's oldest democracy, and a democracy that registered the very first election of women to subnational governing bodies, so we had the first women represented or elected to subnational legislatures, also the first woman represented to a national legislature, and in addition to this, a high proportion of women who operate in public life, like in the labor force. It's really interesting that we don't see that same parity or anything approaching that kind of parity in holding elected office. So I think it's especially important that we have women with us today who are really pushing boundaries by being actively engaged in public life and putting themselves out there for a seat at the table. So thank you very much for being with us tonight. I also have the unique privilege of making a special announcement tonight. So this is hot off the press, fresh news. You were the very first people to hear it ever. So Hart Leadership Program and Panelists are delighted to unveil a new program. It's called the Political Engagement Project, also known as PEP. And it will provide public policy majors with a unique opportunity to apply for a one-of-a-kind fellowship. And this fellowship will help to nurture their political and policy-related development into future leaders. And so you'll get the opportunity as a PEP fellow to engage with guest speakers, to participate in unique training and mentoring activities, that center on running for office and building careers in politics and policy. In order to be eligible, you have to be a public policy major. You will apply during the fall of your junior year. So this fall, we're actually accepting the first round of applications for PEP Fellows. Once elected, students will hold on to their PEP Fellowship all the way through graduation from Stanford. So it's a really powerful opportunity. It's a unique one. And to give you a little taste of what it involves, do I have enough time for that? Pack? Okay, am I being long? So I'm really excited. So fellows will participate in special leadership development opportunities, including the Hart Leadership Program's course that will occur during the spring of your junior year. So you'll take a special course as part of this program. You'll also participate in the work of the PEP Lab. So you'll have an opportunity to help facilitate the actual doing of public policy. So that could be related to working with the policy lab to help do sort of short-term projects related to answering questions and being helpful for elected officials, or also engaging in longer-term projects related to bigger issues that are related to democracy. You could also gain financial assistance for your Stanford internship and or the production of your honors thesis if you choose to do one of those here at Stanford. And finally, you'll have access to some financial support to do your own initiative under the PEP Impact Fund. And through that, you'll have an opportunity to develop a project where you can be a change agent in helping others to get involved in politics and policy as well. So it might be creating a get out the vote effort or doing some research or whatever initiative you can think of to be a change agent here at Duke and at Stanford. So the Political Engagement Project is supported by a generous gift from the Carmen Patman Fund. And it really is a unique and unprecedented opportunity that we hope you'll take advantage of. The very first cohort will be selected soon. The application will go live on Monday, so please keep your eyes open for it. And they will be due by 5 p.m. on Thursday, October 4th. So if you have any questions, please do let me know, let Pastor Peck know, Lolita Kaligatla, and Adam Byer. Adam is right there in the back. Please grab either of us and let us know if you have any questions.
October 24th.
Oh, 24th.
Oh, sorry, 24th. 3 days. You have to be a leader already.
What's that?
3 weeks. So you'll find the application on the Hart Leadership website as well as the Polis website if you're interested. So thanks.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you so much, Professor Rose, for all your work putting together this event. And for those of you who also don't know, in addition to being an assistant professor in the Stanford School of Public Policy and director of research for Polis, Professor Rose is also the author of the upcoming book, Citizens by Degree, that examines the role of federal policies, including the Higher Education Act and Title IX, in advancing the opportunities for women in education, the economy, and in civic participation. So that's awesome. My name is Stephanie Mail. I'm a senior here studying political science, French, and human rights, and I'm in Professor Caxton's science class, Women as Leaders, so I'm really excited to be a part of this event. Now for our panelists, thank you so much for being here and welcome. Since we don't have much time, I'll be really brief in our introductions. But to my right, we have Marcia Morey, who is a member of the North Carolina General Assembly, representing NC House District 30. To her right, we have Gina Collias, who is currently running for the U.S. House of Representatives in NC District 10. And last but not least, we have Jillian Johnson, who is a Durham City Council member and is also the current mayor pro tempore for Durham. So thank you so much for being here. I know it's a busy time of year, election season, but with that, I'll ask the first question. There's an ongoing debate among scholars that women approach the decision to run for office differently than men. Rather than first develop ambition and then decide to run, some scholars suggest that many women decide to run after they've already become politically engaged, and often only someone has encouraged or asked them to. With that in mind, when did you first become interested in running for political office, and what led you to do so? And Marcia, we'll start with you.
Gee, thanks. It's great to be here, and I'm just amazed so many of you are here, and I would love to know why you're here. I asked Stephanie how much they paid y'all to come. But it's exciting, and I think I was always interested in politics when I was young. It was when, it'll show my age, John Kennedy was running for president, and we got our first TV, and just watching this young, dynamic man, and not really following the politics of it, but just someone that was kind of gorgeous to watch. You know? And this great family that played touch football all the time. And so I was always interested in it. And I was a competitor. I was a swimmer. I swam in the 76 Olympics, but I trained with a men's team. So I haven't approached things like, oh, I'm doing this as a woman. I mean, I was just like, I was a swimmer. I happened to be on a men's team. And, that gave me my competitive nature. And I think what really pushed me into politics and into my career was the absolute desire to seek justice and fairness. And my first political endeavor was here in the court system. So I was a judge. I was appointed by our Governor Hunt, and then was a judge for 18 years. And every 4 years up for election. Fortunately, no one ever ran against me. I guess they didn't like the look of a black robe. But so I loved it. I love being a judge. But I think the way our political times have changed, and especially when the 2016 election came up and what I was watching in our state politics, I wanted to jump in. And it just so happened a state legislator in my district passed away suddenly. And I was approached by others, would you think about leaving the bench and taking a 90% salary cut? We make $13,000 a year at the General Assembly. That averages out to 76 cents an hour. So that's kind of how I got here. When I walk in, I see Terry Sanford, and I told Stephanie, I remember one of the most amazing lunches I ever had was at the Washington Duke with one lawyer and Terry Sanford, and sitting there, and so humbled by his interest, his caring. Here I was just a young DA, nobody, and he made me think, you can do anything. And his commitment to public service, that had a huge impact. So it's sometimes the most amazing things that chart the course of your life are when you least expect it. And I guess we'll get more into the politics of now, but so that's kind of how I got there and where I am now.
Okay, I'm Gina Collias, and I'm running for Congress in North Carolina's 10th district. And just to tell you where that is, it's like my home is about 25 minutes from the Charlotte airport. So it goes from Charlotte, it gets on that Gaston County, goes to Asheville all along the South North Carolina border, comes over to Hickory, and then takes the whole southwest side of Lake Norman, and then actually crosses the lake and takes a little bit of Iredell County and almost touches 77. So it's that corridor. It's very gerrymandered. Half of Asheville is in 11, which is Mark Meadows. Half of Asheville is in District 10, and I'm running against a man, Patrick McHenry. This race is important. So for me, my background also, I'm an attorney. I'm licensed in North and South Carolina. I'm a graduate of Chapel Hill. And my daughter's here tonight, who graduated from Chapel Hill recently. So I'm a mother of 3, and I have been married 29 years, and I have always been an active volunteer in my community. And that's just part of who I am and how I'm built. So whether it was selling Girl Scout cookies or helping in the Special Olympics or helping my mother when I was little at Spirit Square when it was just starting in Charlotte, in the arts, to my community in Kings Mountain. And there I served on the Kings Mountain Advisory Board to the Cleveland Chamber. I served on the YMCA board, on the Moss Lake Reservoir board, on the Mountaineer Partnership Board to get us Main Street status, which is a big deal if y'all are looking at in smaller communities. That really gets your community going. So I've always been involved. And the other thing I do is I do real estate. So I'm an attorney in North and South Carolina and a real estate agent in North and South Carolina. So what happened in the 2016 election, 2 other things. One, I helped build a playground with 2,000 people, and it was a community build. And then I did a referendum for liquor by the drink for economic development, because people would say, hey, Gina, we want a Cracker Barrel. And I would be like, well, if you want a Cracker Barrel, you have to have liquor by the drink, because they want to be next to like an Outback Steakhouse and next to a hotel who wants to be able to serve someone a nightcap. Okay, so those are my past. 2016 election, and I do want to share this with you. After the election, I found out that 7 of our 15, we get 13 congressional seats in North Carolina, plus 2 senators, you get 15 college electors. 7 of them lied under oath about where they lived. And I got copies of their voter registration cards, and they said like, oh, I live in District 3, but no, they really live like in Raleigh. So it's not okay. And then what I did is I found a group of about 30 people. We had about 15 attorneys, the rest were paralegals. I was one of 5 core attorneys. We were across the country. We found each other, and we researched all 50 states. We pulled all the statutes for all 50 states governing the electors, and people wanting to vote their conscience. Alexander Hamilton, the Federalist Papers, vote your conscience, and be a check and balance on the popular vote, right? 19 people lied about where they lived. We got copies of all their voter registration cards. The remainder, up to 50, had dual office holding, which you're not allowed to do. Being an elector is considered an office. It's a very important role in our Constitution. And so Pam Bondi, Attorney General for the state of Florida, on Trump's transition team, signed as a college elector. You can't do it. Governor of South Dakota signed. The Attorney General for South Dakota signed. Well, all this rocked my foundation of law. I was very stunned and shocked, sent 1,200 pages in the most legal, scholarly way we knew how to the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is the same committee that put Kavanaugh through. And we heard crickets. And I was like, why aren't they calling us up and saying they got it and that they read it? And they didn't. So then I called all 100 U.S. senators. I either spoke to their person answering the phone and left a long message, or I called on their machine and left a very long message. Then I sent it to all U.S. House of Representatives. And so what the rule is that it takes one congressperson in the House and one senator to stand together to challenge 1 or 50 electors. But that's what the law says to do. And then it requires the House and the Senate to debate each name for 2 hours. And if they had followed the law, Trump could not have become president on January 6th. It would have been after 100 hours of debate that we would have all watched on CNN the next week. And then they could have chosen, like somebody had voted for Colin Powell in the college electors. It comes from that pool. The Senate and the House should have decided our president and vice president. So that's what got me activated to run. Now that's a little long, but y'all need to know that it rocked my core of my sense of justice. And so here I am. There you go.
Thanks. Hey everyone. Again, I'm Jillian Johnson. I'm the Mayor Pro Tem here in the city of Durham, and was first elected in 2015. Everything in that question definitely rings true for me. I decided to run for office after being convinced by a number of people. I actually refer to it as a campaign of harassment that took place over about an entire year of people trying to convince me to run for city council. At the time, the first person who asked me, I think it was one of the most shocking things I've ever heard in my life. Why would I ever do that to myself? And you must be crazy. And then, yeah, I think it was probably more than 7 people who asked me, but over the course of that year, really talked to people in the community about, and people who thought that I should run, about why me? What do you think I'm going to accomplish in that office? Why do you think that the work that is suited for me, my skills, my personality, all those questions. And I definitely wasn't sure that I would do a good job. And I eventually was convinced to run and I wasn't sure that I would do a good job, and I also wasn't sure that it was the right place, like the right role for me in the kind of work that I want to do in the world. I came from a community organizing and like movement activist background, and so going from that work where you're pressuring the government to being inside the government felt like a really big shift, and I wasn't sure that it was a shift that I wanted to make or that it would be valuable for me to make. And was eventually convinced by one friend who told me that even if all I did was transparency work, like even if the only thing that happened as a result of me being on city council was that residents knew more about what was happening in the city and the city knew more about what was happening in the community, that alone would be worth my time. And then anything else I could do was icing. And I was like, well, if that's all, then sure. Let me at it. If that's all I need to do to be successful, it's fine. Luckily, I think I have been able to be more successful than just doing the transparency work. I have done a lot of that and have worked for to increase the equity in the boards and commissions that we appoint. So we have a lot of political appointments of residents to different boards that advise the city. And when I entered, most of those boards were majority white and majority male. And so we've shifted that, trying to get more people of color and more women onto those boards. We launched a direct democracy project called participatory budgeting, where we let residents of Durham decide how to spend $2.5 million of city money this past year, and we're going to be repeating that every other year. We've started a race equity task force that's going to be recommending to the city early next year ways to make the work that we do both internally and externally with the community more equitable as regards race. So I feel like we've been able to do a lot. And that it has definitely been worth it moving from that kind of organizer activist frame into a more like insider frame. And I work now with a national organization called Local Progress, which is a national network of progressive local elected officials. And we talk a lot about an inside-outside strategy. So having people, community members, and residents working in community to push a policy or push an agenda in cooperation with people working within the government on that same agenda, and with making sure that there's two-way communication all the time between folks who are in decision-making positions and the advocacy community. And so I've tried to bring that perspective and that framing to the work as well. But yeah, I think I am definitely a case study in has to be asked to run a whole lot of times. Isn't sure that she's going to be any good at it. And yeah, was only really interested in office after people, like I never thought about running for office until someone suggested it to me. And my experience working within Local Progress with other women elected officials who are mostly at the local level, right? City councils, school boards, those like that level of elected official, most of the women that I've met say the same thing, that they were asked to run or they were tagged because of some previous work that they've done, like in their teachers union or in their community organization, and that they had to be convinced to do it, but are glad that they were and are glad that they're doing it.
Yeah, me too. I saw that. We should probably speak into the mics because I don't think they're picking us up from here, so that'll be a fun addition. Yeah, that is really interesting how you all have different experiences, and I do wonder kind of where it comes in with the local versus the state versus even federal and how that changes things. So for our next question, actually, holding office and campaigning, for Jillian and Marcia, what have been some of the biggest challenges you face in office since being elected? And are these connected to gender or other parts of your identity in any way? And for Gina, you have an interesting background because you ran as a Republican in NC District 10 in 2018 and are now running as a Democrat in the same district for 2020. First of all, what led you to make that switch? And secondly, do you notice any major differences in running as a Democratic woman versus as a Republican woman? And we'll start with you.
Okay, well, I did. I registered as a Republican when I was 18, and my parents were Republican, and so I just did that. But I always voted my conscience and always tried to vote for the person. And when 2016 happened, I thought, and after the experience that I shared with y'all about the Electoral College, I actually, right after that, turned off the TV and Facebook and lockdown, and just said I've done everything I can do. And then a friend of mine who had ovarian cancer and was in stage 4 was coming out in remission, and she's like, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I've turned it off," and told her what I just told y'all. And she said, "Well, you're getting back on Facebook. I need to see my people." And so I said, okay. So that was in June, and that night I started a group called Rational Republicans on Facebook. And I started it as a secret group and couldn't figure out how to share it very well. So I made it a closed group on July 3rd, and on July 4th, there were 444 people. So I thought I was the last Republican who was seeing what was happening. And I found that there were a lot of people like me who were saying, wait a minute, this, because I wrote down the party's been hijacked. We are pro-choice. We want to protect our environment. The media is the true checks and balances on our politicians. So then we decided, because we felt like the party had shifted so far, we would write our own party platform. So on the Rational Republicans Facebook page on the left-hand side is our platform, and we get it organically from the group. There's about 3,500 people in the group that are active, and then so you circle around to the 14th draft of the Rational Republicans, and that's how I ran and just kind of jumped in fast. So then I ran as a Republican, and then everybody last year, a lot of the questions, they would say, why aren't you a Democrat? So I spoke at the Women's March. I went to Dr. Reverend Barber's Moral March in Raleigh and actually walked with a lot of Duke students from the medical school who were, chanting healthcare as a human right, and helped March for Our Lives in Hickory. All those events just rang true to me, and the Democratic Party has been very welcoming to me. And I think it's given a really unique perspective going between them, because, and here's a concrete example, when I go down the street, which I have many events, you have community events, they should walk off the downtown, and we're at a fair, a county fair, and I go out and I talk to people, and I want to hand them my card and say, I'm Gina Collias, I'm running for Congress, and they say, well, what party are you with? So I say Democrat. If they're Republican, they'll go, no, I don't want to talk to you. I don't even want to take your card. And then I say, that just opens up the doors for me, because I say, now just wait a minute. I was a Republican for 34 years, and I switched to be a Democrat. And then they gasp, and they go, why'd you do that? And then I have them, because then they're in a conversation with me, and I'm able to talk to them, and I tell them as much as I can and talk, and they really get on a human level to open up, where I don't think someone else would have that ability to do that. So that's been very eye-opening to me. So.
Jillian, you want to go next?
Sure. So biggest challenges that I faced in office, number one, rezoning hearings. Did not see this coming. People are so intense about rezoning hearings. And they've become really personal, and people, usually it's neighbors fighting each other, right? Kind of using the city as a stage. And we have to decide what side we're on, and the way that that the hearings are set up are very confrontational. You have to come in and declare if you're a proponent or an opponent, and they basically battle in City Hall. No matter what decision you make, you're going to make half the people in the room mad. And we've had some very angry people who I was, kind of afraid of come to zoning hearings and leave very upset. So that was definitely something I did not see coming. That's been a real challenge, is dealing with those, when people have a lot of intense feelings about a decision that we're making. And there have been some decisions where I anticipate people having really intense feelings and kind of knew that was coming. The land use questions, I did not see coming. So that's always the thing that's something that I bring up to people as something that was unexpectedly challenging in this job. I think the thing that has been the most difficult, that I think relates in some ways to race and gender and sexuality and presentation and all these things, is the amount of personal hatred that I get, which I think is sometimes out of proportion to that of some of my colleagues who don't hold the identities that I hold. There have definitely been, right now I'm running for re-election, and one of the opposing candidates, who's a guy, every time I see him at a candidate event, tells me to smile. Love to see that smile, right? I'm like, and my death glare is pretty good, but he keeps doing it. When I ran the first time, I had a person ask me, so what you said before, how are you going to really have time for this job? You have 2 young kids. There was another candidate who was running at the same time who also had 2 young kids, but was a man and never got asked that question. His wife is the CEO of a company here in the Triangle, so she's not home making all the bottles and changing all the diapers. She's out in the world doing stuff. But the assumption was that she was home with the kid and he was out making a political career. So I definitely feel that I get more more intense scrutiny than people with very similar political goals, or who are in the same role as I am because of my race and my gender and being openly queer and all of these things that I've chosen to do. So yeah, that can be, but it's also hard to pin down. It's hard, I'm maybe maybe they're just extra mad at me. And maybe it's not really, so it's hard to separate how much of it might be coming from people's expectations versus, just personality concerns. It's hard to figure out exactly what might be coming at you because someone is racist or because someone is a misogynist. I have had concerns for my safety. I put cameras in my house and got a dog a couple of years ago because of the level of some of the violent rhetoric that I was getting from people, not always just residents of Durham. Now we have sort of this broadly violent political culture where, if something about you, if one of your political enemies put something about you on the internet, then you might get, 5,000 tweets from angry people all over the country who don't live here and don't really have any interest in politics, but they hear city council member in Durham criticized Jordan Peterson, and now you get 5,000 Jordan Peterson stands tweeting angry messages at you. So that's just kind of, that's become an occupational hazard of being in politics as well. And I think that, and there have been some really good reports about how that sort of political violence and political rhetoric targets women as well, and Black women especially, on Twitter and on Facebook and in those places where people can be kind of anonymous. So yeah, I think it's been a struggle. I'm sure it will continue to be a struggle. And yeah, I just try to be open about it. So people, I don't think we have to do this work. People have to do this work. But it is also important to be aware of what the climate is like and what you might be getting yourself into.
I guess the biggest challenge that I initially faced was I was, as I said, a judge for 18 years, and you sit and you listen. And judges, we were nonpartisan. I had nothing to do with the politics. Fairness was everything. And then suddenly, from a Thursday sitting on the bench in the Durham courthouse, and then on a Monday, when I was sworn into the General Assembly, sitting on the very next to last row in this huge room of 120 representatives, and it's speak up, speak out, take political stance. That was a huge shift. And I still think I'm probably more reserved to listen before, jumping in the fray. But I did jump in the fray. And one reason, my education was in that courtroom. And I was really learning about overcriminalization and mental illness and what substance abuse the things that I watched every day, a case in front of me, affect people, and saying, we've got to change this. We have got to do something about it. And North Carolina at the time, we were the last state in the country. On your 16th birthday, you're treated as an adult. You're an adult criminal. And so for years, I fought to raise our age of juvenile jurisdiction to 18, and that bill came up the year I got there. And so that was my first, we can do it. And actually, we did it. And it was great, and it became bipartisan, and a Republican really engaged me to help get this through, and we did it. And that was oh, this is going to be great. I was zoning hearing. We got this. But now the challenge, and if you read the news, what we saw happening on Capitol Hill or what we saw at the state capitol on September 11th, the breaking of rules, the lack of ethics. We don't follow the rules we set. And if you have a majority, you can control everything. And I could go through a whole list of how the democratic process is skewed by the majority party making the rules. And if we switch parties becoming the majority, we have to safeguard that things are fair, that they're equitable. I am huge on gun safety now. After the Parkland shooting and the outcry, especially by students, and by what I saw in courtrooms of trying to get a red flag bill passed. I would hear over and over kids charged with murder or having been killed, and someone in that courtroom say, I knew that was going to happen. We saw him so angry. We knew he had a gun. We can do something. And this is a nonpartisan issue to me, So I introduce a bill, if you're in the majority, you decide who the committee chair and where your bill's going to go. And so it goes right to a judiciary committee. That chairman would never bring up that bill. Never discussed, never debated, voted down for goodness sakes. But let's have a fair hearing and debate. When so many people are clamoring, let's do something for gun safety. So the frustration with the rules, things that we're about to vote on, and the rules say, well, 4 majority representatives can come in and sit in the committee and they can vote the way the speaker tells them to, even though they haven't heard any debate. I mean, that's a rule that is bending fairness and the majority democratic process. So those are challenges that we see. I mean, look at the rules, what they're talking about, the whistleblower in Washington today. I mean, it's ripe everywhere. And I don't know if you all heard what happened a week ago at our General Assembly and talk about a strong woman, that we were told no votes. There will be no votes at 8:30 in the morning on September 11th. I mean, some people, not many. I was working on redistricting. And so I was 5 minutes from the floor. Most of all my colleagues were told no votes. So only 10 Democrats showed up on the floor. And yet suddenly every Republican was in their seat. They called for the vote. It was a veto override of the budget. Huge vote. We have been there, held hostage every day since June 30th. Every day. And suddenly, when one of the leaders said no votes, told the press no votes, and then the speaker takes the stand, and they suddenly call for a vote. I mean, it was outrageous. And the sense of trust between, and I'm not saying Republicans are bad, Democrats are good, the party system, you know, is so polarized now. And the trust is so broken that we have to get it back. And that's a frustration, but it's also, you know, I hope a challenge to help work on and improve.
That is a great transition point for our last question before we open up for Q&A, which is, what advice would you give to college students, especially women, who are interested in running for office? So Jillian, we'll start with you.
Sure. So the best advice I've heard, this is not my personal advice, but an organization that I've worked with as part of Local Progress, which says run as you are. So a lot of people think that before they run for office, they have to, you know, get an advanced degree or spend 10 years in the corporate world or, you know, have some sort of experience to say, okay, now I can do this. You don't have to. Just do whatever you've done now. That's your experience that you can take into running for office. And there have been incredible people who have come from, you know, no political background whatsoever, who have successfully run for office and won and are doing incredible things right now at the state and you know, local, state, and federal level. A lot of people, especially women, right, have these really unrealistic expectations of ourselves and what we need to be successful, when the truth is you can win, right? Just with the experience that you have and the work that you've done and the care that you have for your community. You can win, and it's important for us to be represented by ordinary people with ordinary life experiences, who, you know, and for that representation to matter, and for people, just regular folks, to have a say. I tell my kids, you know, I grew up with everyone saying, like, well, you could be the president one day, and I was like, no, that's crazy. If Donald Trump can be president, y'all, anybody can be president. And that's what I tell kids now. And they like totally vibe with that. They're like, you know, you are right. In no way is that man qualified to be the president. So, I mean, that's kind of like a sick, twisted, like, so you can do it too. No, but like, you know, I would be excited for, you know, every single person in this room to run for office, because we have a lot to contribute, and I think it's time for people to, just do it, just try it. And if you lose, you can try it again. Lots of elections, yeah.
Jillian kind of captured it all. I think one thing I found that a lot of my colleagues at the General Assembly, they have particular issues that is their absolute passion. And that's why they're there. And I always know if it's an environmental issue, I can go to Pricey Harrison from Greensboro. I mean, she knows that. You know, education. I know who to go to. People come to me for court-related and justice issues. So it's not like you have to know everything about everything, but everyone is such an individual and they bring their talents and their knowledge about particular areas. But I think the biggest thing, you have to have passion about something, and that passion has to relate to the care of all of us, you know, in whatever endeavor it is. Public service, I think, is the greatest thing there is. And there's many ways to do it. Elected office, I wish people would look more into. As Jillian said, if every one of you would be thinking about it, I would have been the first one to say, I'll never do that. You know, I was like, not me. I was more of a juvenile delinquent than I was really a judge. You know, it became the best thing in the world to sit on the bench and care about people and hear stories, and now it's the best thing in the world going over to Raleigh every day and fighting, because I know I'm fighting for values that I think most of our constituents, regardless of party, hold. You give up a lot of privacy. It takes a lot of time. If you're not working, you're campaigning. Fundraising is the worst thing in the world. I don't recommend it to anybody, but you know, unfortunately it's part of the system. But I would say if you have a passion, you know, follow that passion no matter what you do. It's going to make your life go so much better, and translate that into how can I acquire authority to help make this world better.
I totally agree with everything that they've said about having a passion and just doing it, and you get so much back. For me, I could have never dreamed of doing this, but for what the injustice that I found. So for y'all, the most important thing you can do is vote and bring people with you to vote. We have to vote, and your generation has to vote. You've got to get it out. All the likes and shares that you can do on the web to get out the vote is huge. And then everything starts at the local level. It really does, in your neighborhood. And for me, we moved to Kings Mountain and there wasn't a playground. You know, it's like, so I helped build a playground. And it doesn't matter what it is. And then somebody else says, well, we need this, we need some restaurants. So that gets you to the next thing. And then you find things, and that's how your way meanders. And if you do things that you are passionate about and that you like, you'll be good at it naturally because you're interested.
Can I add something about voting?
Yeah, please.
There's an election right now in Durham. So if you live in Durham, you can register and vote at One Stop Early Voting right now until October 4th. If you are from a state that is less competitive for 2020 than North Carolina, change your registration to North Carolina. You have more of a say. Your vote is more valuable here than it is in New Jersey or New York or California. Those states where we pretty much know what's going to happen. North Carolina is definitely in play. And One Stop Early Voting right now for the primary municipal election, and then in October, early voting starts mid-October for the general and election day. Primary election day is October 8th, and the general election day is November 5th. Even if you're not registered, if you go early, you can register and vote same day. Definitely consider moving your registration to North Carolina, especially coming in 2020. It's going to be really important.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, thank you so much. And so now we're going to open up for Q&A, and just a heads up, Jillian has to leave right at 6, so if anyone has specific questions for her.
I can stay a little bit longer. I got to be somewhere at 6:30. So.
Okay, well, maybe also ask those first. But
ask me first.
I have a question for Marcia Morey. So I'm on the swimming and diving team here, and I'm just wondering how being a student athlete prepared you for the work that you do and the leadership that you're doing now.
What stroke do you swim?
I'm a diver.
Oh.
You
You take the risk, all right. I think that's where my basic sense of fairness and hard work, and what I learned about self-discipline, being a swimmer and getting up at 5:30 every morning, and then 5 hours of weight training and swimming and going to classes and doing well in school, gave me the discipline. And I think even more than that, gave me the self-confidence that anything I put my mind to, I think I could do. So people that do juggle, whether it's music or art or athletics or anything, I think it gives you that extra boost that you don't have to do it, but you have just challenged yourself, setting goals, meet by meet, dive by dive, whatever it is. But that translates into the rest of your life. I mean, usually when everyone introduced me or they hear, oh, she was captain of the Olympic team, it's like, oh, I couldn't wait to get away from swimming when it was over. But it has followed me and really is kind of the fuel in my tank to keep me going. So stay with it. Let me come to a meet.
I have a question for Gina. So we know that there is a lot of homogeneity in elected office in this country.
There's a lot of what?
Homogeneity.
Okay.
We also know that it's skewed by one party particularly, and that the Republican Party specifically does not have a lot of women or people of color in elected office. And a lot of people think that in the elections next year, because of Joan Perry's recent defeat in North Carolina, they're going to be even more hesitant to put the establishment support behind women. And I'm curious, as a former Republican woman who ran for office, what you think about all that?
Well, I have something very interesting I can tell you exactly about that. Elise Stefanik, who is the Republican Congresswoman from District 21 in New York, had an event last January in Washington to help Republican women get out of the primary and win, right? And so she said, come on up to Washington. We're going to have this one-day seminar. So I went up to Washington, and I listened all day. And just to understand, 89 Democratic women, 13 Republican women. There's only 20, and I know you touched on this, there's only 24% women in the House and the Senate, and we are probably 51% of the population. Okay, so the parity has to come. And it's also the 100th anniversary of the right for suffragettes, and for suffrage. Okay, so I'm at this event. I'm there in Washington all day. And they're saying, does anybody know anybody who wants to run in a Republican primary that's a woman? Does anybody know anybody? And I'm sitting there looking around going, hello, So at the end of the day, I'm talking to her main fundraiser, and I said, I ran against Patrick McHenry last year, and I want to run again, and I need help. And she said, well, we're going to help anybody but you. That was her quote to me. We'll help anyone but you. And I said, well, why? And she said, because Patrick's paid us. He's protected. So these are hardcore, real examples. And as a woman, and as anyone who's young right now who wants to fight injustice, you have to plow through and just do it. So.
Yeah, I have a question for the whole panel. I guess the first part of the question is, how often do you find yourself working with other women? And when you do you find that there's a certain level of kind of solidarity to identity there? If not, why?
So I'm really lucky on the Durham City Council. We're majority women. There are 4 of the 7 of us are women, so I work with women a lot. I think that our political differences overwhelm our solidarity, though, sometimes. I feel solidarity with the women who I work with the most and, vibe with the most politically. I don't with the ones who I don't. So I don't think that it's been I don't think it's been a significant factor. If we weren't a majority women body, then I think maybe it would be different, right? Because I don't feel as much pressure from being in a male-dominated space if I'm there with a lot of other women.
For me, I have been pleasantly surprised that men and women have been fairly equally supportive. So, and I feel like I have been inspired by AOC and these other women who have come forward through the 2018 election. I mean, that inspires me, but I think other people have been, have shown equal camaraderie, and there's people who see the injustice that I see and that want to fight for things that I want to fight for, and for universal health care or things like that I feel are important for everyone. So I've had a good feel from both sides.
I do too. I think there's a lot of solidarity. And what I've found in the House, there are groups, mostly of women, that want to get together to move things forward. Let's take action. A lot of the men are just waiting, well, it'll come up and then we'll debate it, but the women are like, oh no, not on my watch. So I think there's a lot of fight and there's a whole lot of energy, and it's just so much easier to, and I think people are always watching if it's after work or you're having dinner, and it's harder for a woman and a man to go out and have dinner without people thinking, oh, what's going on there, But for women to get together and be working on issues and really moving the ball forward, it's a great question, but it makes it a lot of fun too.
I have a question for Jillian Johnson. So throughout the panel and a lot more, we've highlighted the importance of local office and like what you do in your local area. What would you say that the issue you're most passionate about, or the issue that is most important in local office that you deal with on your day-to-day basis?
Sure. So for Durham specifically, and I think for a lot of cities right now, housing is the biggest issue kind of on our radar. And as I've traveled both in the U.S. and internationally, there is a global housing crisis in cities where people are actively being displaced from cities all over the world by rising costs. Here in the U.S., just because of the structure of our economic system, we have not been able to intervene as effectively as some other countries have. So, for example, in Vienna, Austria, something like 60% of people live in social housing, which is publicly subsidized housing that is you pay based on your income, right? Here in the U.S., we haven't invested significantly in public housing since Reagan. And as a result, now cities are facing this huge crisis of having to deal with the lack of maintenance that has occurred on public housing, the lack of the creation of new public housing. And in Durham, of course, we have both an affordable housing crisis, which is most severe, but we also just have a straight up housing crisis because we haven't built enough new housing for all the people who want to move here. And so those people are now buying into neighborhoods that have traditionally been affordable and displacing those folks. And we see that happening in lots and lots of places all over the country. I'm actually co-hosting a housing conference here in Durham in a couple of weeks with local elected officials from cities around the country to think about how we can affect this issue. But really, there has to be a national push. And there have been a couple. I think Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have both put out national housing policies that call for investing billions to trillions of dollars into housing. And that's I think Bernie's is like $2.5 trillion. And I haven't read the plan, but when I heard that, I was like, yeah, that's the right number. Like that is the amount of money that is going to be needed to really live up to this idea that housing is a human right, that everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to live. The lack of investment at the federal level and at the state level, for the entire time that I've been alive, is staggering. And now we're in this place where cities are being asked to solve the problem with our, Durham's entire budget is $500 million a year. We could put all of that into creating affordable housing and not fix the problem. So the solution really has to come from the state and from the federal government, but that's something that we really struggle with here, and a lot of people are struggling with too. Yeah.
In the back. Yeah. So jumping off the gerrymandering issue, what would be your ideal district electoral system makeup in order to have a really representative legislature? And second, what do you think you could actually get through?
Is that a question for the whole panel?
Yeah, whole panel, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
We're thick into it right now. So North Carolina has been found to be politically and racially gerrymandered. And the Congressional and the courts, we keep having to go back to the courts. So last week we were there and the courts ordered us, redraw your maps. They're horribly politically gerrymandered. And so what did we do? They said, well, let's use a base map that shows how out of the norm we are, and the base maps were there to show the problem. But the first thing they did, well, let's see where all the incumbents live. And let's dot everyone's address on here and make sure we won't exclude or double bunk people. No, our maps are wrong. Our maps are totally wrong. And the courts have said that. And we went back and played the same game over again and sent them back to the courts, which I think hopefully they're going to kick out, get a special master to do it again. But we've introduced bills. I'm a primary sponsor on a citizen redistricting bill The citizens should do it. Politicians should not be drawing the maps to choose their voters. Hello, kindergarten. So it's a huge issue with redistricting and getting fair maps. To me, it's like a citizen commission. Look at California. They've done it. They've done a fabulous job with the citizen redistricting. There are 4 or 5 bills that have been introduced. They want a constitutional amendment to have legislative staff be involved. No, they were all politically appointed. Keep elected officials out of it. Give it over to people who are affected by it. And I think there are some wonderful models out there, but it is one of the hottest issues. And then after we went through all this redistricting, now we're into the voting machines. Because we're saying, well, what kind of voting machine should we use? Should we use these electronic, digital touch voting? Which they found 4,000 ballots were never counted with touch screen voting in North Carolina alone in 2016. Paper ballots, you have to audit, so you go through all the fairness for the maps. And then when you go to the polls, you're using machines that are easily rigged, make mistakes. And so we have a whole issue with recreating the foundation of one person, one vote. How's that for optimism?
An even more optimistic view, right? Which is, okay, pie in the sky. Why do we have districts? What's the point of them? In more representative parliamentary democracies, you don't vote in a district based on where you live. All of North Carolina could vote, based on who we want. And whoever, if we were, I think right now maybe we're, slightly over 50% Democrats and slightly under Republicans for votes, then 52% of the seats would go to Democrats and 48% of the seats would go to Republicans. I think those systems tend to be more representative, and we in this country have not really used them very much for a lot of reasons. But as long as we're dreaming, I feel like shifting towards systems of elections and systems of voting that are more representative and arguing for those systems could be an important part of the political moment that we're moving into. Also, things like ranked choice voting. Where we get to, instead of just voting, for one person, you get to say, okay, here are my top 5 presidential candidates. Could be a really exciting innovation. And they tried it in some cities in California and in the state of Maine for state races, but it's still pretty new. But there are a lot of ideas floating around about ways that we can make things more representative. I think those ideas are more exciting to me than figuring out the fairest way to draw the districts. What we will end up doing, I hope, is figuring out the fairest way to draw the districts, because that's what we have now. But I hope that in the future we can get to better systems too.
I'll just add, on the congressional level, you don't have to live in a particular congressional district to run in that district. So the state is done a different way than the federal system. So as it is now, I don't have to live in District 10. I happen to live in District 10. But there are people who ran last year in the primary with me that lived at the beach. They come in. And so in the state level, it's done differently. And then the other thing that's happening is the court case with the Common Cause, and what the House is, and with the redrawing of the districting, it's not affecting the congressional maps, is what I'm trying to say. So my District 10 is going to stay gerrymandered unless the House says we're going to just go ahead and do it all and not have to be sued again. Which I wrote the House last week, and I hope you can say that there's people out there that we really want you to just take care of it and do an independent redistricting. And we need independent redistricting on the state level and on the federal level. I mean, that's huge. And then the other, and people talk about ranked choice voting, that really takes it away from one party dominating another, and you actually get the best people surfaced to the top, which is great. And then the other overriding thing that gets into the gerrymandering is, just because it's overarching, is we have to get Citizens United overturned. We've got to get the dark money out. It is so hard to raise money, and I know you touched on it. It is a horrible, necessary existence, and the only way that will happen organically is to get new people in who want to curb that, and it's y'all, it's the young people. Y'all got to get your friends, get 10 friends, and vote.
And if I could just add one other thing, and it's also, we've introduced the idea on open primaries. Because I don't know how many of you all are registered or you're unaffiliated. I moved here, I was unaffiliated. I mean, that's the biggest growing segment of young voters. They don't want the party politics. And so open primaries, you don't have to be a Republican or Democrat. You can go in, do some ranked choice voting. But, you know, I think we're going to have to pay a whole lot more attention to the unaffiliated voters' rights and give them much more of a voice.
Do we have time for another question, or should we wrap it up?
There was a question.
Is there? There's one more?
I just wanted to clarify that real quick, that North Carolina has a hybrid system. So if you're an independent, you can pick which party to vote in their primary.
That's absolutely correct. And as an unaffiliated, you can walk in and you have the right to say, I want to take the Democratic primary ballot, or I want to take the Republican primary ballot.
Any last questions? Here we go. Back there.
Hi. I have a question. So we talked about if you want to go and run, just go and run. But what were the next steps as far as what were there like resources that you tapped into? Because we talked about fundraising was really difficult. So how did you really get out there once you decided this is something I wanted to do?
For a local race, it's not as hard. You know, I had to raise 40 grand and had a team of organizers who were working with me. I think if you want to run for state or national office, and even local office, you know, it can be helpful doing some trainings. And I did one training here. There's a program, was it Ready to Run? Is that what it's called? That trains folks to run for elected office. So I went to a training here in this building. But there are lots of organizations, and a bunch of them have sprouted up over the last couple of years to try to get people ready to run for office, and also train campaign workers, people to run campaigns and do the fundraising and that kind of work. There's a group called Rise to Run that's specifically for women. There's a group called Vote, Run, Lead that I think is also women only. Rise to Run is another group. I think they endorse progressives under 40, under 35, something like that. So I know there's one that's specifically focused on climate justice. So there are all these organizations that will train you. There's a couple victory funds. There's an LGBTQ victory fund and a Latino victory fund that will train you if you're part of those communities. So there's lots of ways to go get training for the specific, like to get the skills that you need to run a successful campaign, or to help somebody run a successful campaign. If you don't want to be the candidate, there's a huge need for qualified campaign workers as well. So I recommend, going and getting that kind of training, and even shadowing someone who's doing the job that you want, just to make sure that you actually want it. Those are two things I would say.
I was just going to say volunteer on a campaign. Just log in and say, hey, I want to volunteer, I'll do something, and then you'll start seeing what's happening. And every campaign needs help.
And we're actively recruiting, like we have in the House Caucus recruitment committee, and we want to make sure every race is competitive, and so we go out and we look at the district and we find out, who can we recruit. So a lot of times that's part of the party doing it. Lillian's List is a great organization in North Carolina that trains and tries to recruit good young progressive women. So there are a lot of groups, and I think you're right. Hitting the ground with someone else, seeing if this is really what you want to do. But we need youth. We need, I think, what is it? Hashtag Run for Something?
Yeah,
which
Run
is
for Something is another
35.
national organization. Yeah.
Of course, I'm over 35, so it's like,
So y'all are not. Launch Progress, you can look them up. They endorse progressives under 35, under 40. 35 or 40 is usually the age cutoff. After that, you're old. Yeah, it's pretty depressing.
Well, yeah, I used to tell everybody I was 29, and then they put my age in the paper.
And they will do that. They will put all kinds of stuff about you in the paper.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Let's have a round of applause.